Okay, good morning. So, today is Wednesday, day 3 of our closure. I haven't quite lost my mind, but I'm sure we're going to get there close. Now, what I would like you to start doing today is looking at the plan that you were doing on Monday. So thank you very much for getting those done. They were really, really lovely and absolutely super. But what we need to do in order to prepare for our essay is that we need to start exploding our quotes. Now, the sheet that I've put onto iTunes gives you 4 areas for you to then be able to think about. But what I've done here is I've written down 2 quotes. We've got 2 quotes here, one from Waiting for Dark, which is in the opening line of Yes, Disabled. And then down here, I've also used Snarled and Rattled, which again is going to be the opening line of Out Out. Now, one thing that's really, really important that you need to make sure that you remember when you're doing this is in order for you to get to your levels, so the higher marks in our marks game, and this is something that I will post again on for you for Friday, but if you have a look here, a level 3, which is where I really, really want you to be there at the minimum. If I just show you this will make more sense to you in my next one, is that this part here, there is a clear understanding of how the poets have used language and structured their poems. That "and" is really, really important. The next one here, there is an explanation is given of how the language and the structure achieves the effect the poets wanted. So this is where we need to start thinking about the words the poet has used, the order that they've put those words, the ideas that they're having, and where they've developed those throughout the poem. So one thing we have to remember is that these poems are not simple fixed things. They move, they develop, they're shaped, and then everything kind of grows through it. So what I've got here, okay, is I've got language there, and I've put it in a highlighted one just to remind you that we've got to keep focusing on this. So you've got the language, which basically is words, and the words that the poet uses and what they do with them, and do they put them into a simile? Do they use metaphors instead? Do they possibly bring in a bit of alliteration? Is there repetition going on? What about onomatopoeia? Okay, so some of the words there, that's also technique as well. And when we explode our quote, it's a really, really good way to pin that down and make sure we tick that box well and truly and make it sorted. This one here, this next one, not that you can read it because I smudged it with my finger. There you are, smudged finger. This is structure, and this basically is the order and the build-up of the ideas. Now, if you remember back to when we were doing the anthology work, and question 4, I think it is, when we're dealing with the structure of the writing, so for example, Chinese Cinderella, or the Rock in a Hard Place, the chap who bites his arm off, this one here is that what information we begin at the start of the poem, and how does that develop and grow and build by the time that we get to the end of it. And you need to make sure that you're doing that. If you don't do that, and it's an or, look at where you start to dribble down to, okay? So level 3, it's brilliant. Level 2, not so much. So some comment on the effect of the language and possibly all the structure. So level 2 is almost really a bit of a hit and miss. And then if you really want to kind of push the boat out a little bit further and find yourself stranded in the middle of the water, we've then got level 1, and you just tell me the story, okay? So you're able to identify that the writer has used words, excellent, and that there is a structure, which means that there's a story, and that's level 1, and I have absolutely no desire for any of you to be anywhere near that because you're a lot better than that. So once we've got all of that sorted out, and that's in our head buzzing around, okay, we then need to remind ourselves of this, the what, how, and the why. The where part comes into when we start moving into the second poem. So the what is the writer trying to do? What is the type of tragedy that they're trying to present to us? How are they going to get that across? So what part of the idea they're developing? The how bit is what we're going to be doing here. How have they managed to achieve that? How have they used their words? How have they ordered everything? How have they developed their idea? That can then move nicely into the why. What is the point? Why are they wanting us to do this? So this comes down to, why is this important? Why is this a particular feature they want us to pick up on? Why is it important to them? Why do we need to know? So here we can talk potentially about Wilfred Owen's message. Don't forget that slide that we had on the PowerPoint when he's talking about it's war that he wants people to know. He wants this to be a warning. And then we can maybe look at Frost and possibly in Gabriel. This is when you can come into, but be careful with how much time you spend on it. So this is where we can start talking about actually Frost is making comment here. He's making a little bit of a tentative comment, slightly gentle, not putting it out too far. But the idea that actually maybe we need to do a lot more care in the community. We need to look after our children. We need to make sure that we let children be children. We don't force them to work and do a job of an adult, which actually is very interesting because it is the sort of thing that Wilfred Owen, in his poem, is dealing with. Because our soldier, who's not 19, a year ago signed up, and now he's broken, and that's really sad. And then again, why does Wilfred Owen want us to think about all of this? Why is this brutality important for him? And one of the things that we'll have a look at in our next video, when we look at the way we actually put it together, is that you can incorporate that why really, really nicely. Now, if you are confident and it works, you can blend these three together. There is one thing, though, that I want you to make sure you don't do. I do not want you to start a paragraph with a quote. You need to introduce the quote, okay? So you could say, for example, Wilfred Owen's metaphor of blah-de-blah. That's absolutely fine. But you don't go, waiting for dark, which Wilfred Owen writes about, so-and-so. That's really bad form, and that won't do any good. So follow these three here. Keep those ticking along inside your head. And they will also, with these ones here, help inform how we then explode our quote. So currently, we're in my study, and you are propped up on a gardening book and I think 5 recipe books, all about eating yourself healthy. So it's quite appropriate for this time of year. There's the desk. It's all a bit scratchy. I've done all sorts of different marking and creative jobbies on this desk. And hopefully you won't hear the dog barking or the children screaming. So let's get on with what we're doing here. So I've chosen Waiting for Dark. And what I've done, and as you can then clearly see, is I've actually gone into that quote and I've looked at specific parts of the word. Now, some of these quotes, you're not going to be able to do this very often, but that's fine. What I'd like you to do is make sure that you do this more often than not. And if you have a quote that you can't do a huge amount with, that's okay. But make sure that there are other quotes that you can do things. So we can make sure that we've got all of those assessment objectives, all those bullet points in those levels ticked off quite nicely. So what we've got here is I've chosen the word waiting because I think this is quite an important quote, and using the quotes that you've chosen yourself based on those sheets that you did for me on Monday, we've already got a head start. So then I've got here the waiting, it applies something as expected. And then I thought, well, actually that's quite interesting because that means that something's coming, that he wants something to occur. Okay, so maybe we've got sort of a personal desire here as well. Okay, and then I thought, well, actually, what is he waiting for? So, well, he's waiting for the dark. And I thought, actually, the is a really interesting word because it's very, very specific. It's not a dark or possibly sometime in the future. He's very, very specific. He knows what it is. And then I thought, well, actually, what exactly does he know what it is? And then I went down and said, right, this comes down to the how. So here we've got the how and the what, they're bubbling around together. So then it's a metaphor for approaching death, which we already know about and we've already talked about. And there's a huge amount of death in this poem. It's not the most jolly. But then I put down here actually because my mind was beginning to think, and this is something that you will find as well, is that as you go through these quotes and as you go through the analysis, you will start sparking ideas that we hadn't necessarily covered in class or that you hadn't originally thought about. And that's absolutely perfect. That's a really, really good way, really good demonstration that your mind is buzzing and the juices are flowing in the right direction. So we know it's a metaphor because that's what we'd already made note of. Use those PowerPoints that we did in class. Use the notes in the boxes. Remember, we had the boxes there. Okay, so use the words in the boxes to help phrase what you're saying. But I'd say the dark, it's a metaphor for approaching death. We've established that. And then I thought, well, actually, maybe it's possibly personifying dark as death. Okay, so I've got a capital letter here, which makes it a proper noun, the name of a person or a place. Okay, so maybe dark is death. Maybe that's who That's what he's waiting for. That's that person to take him off because he can't bear this anymore. So I thought, right, okay, so I've done some language. That's a nice tick. Well, what about structure? I need to have some kind of acknowledgement that this isn't it. That there is a development throughout the poem. That this is the start of really a very depressing piece of writing. So then at the top here, as you can see, I've put opening line. And that's really important. So you're acknowledging to me as your marker that you know where this stuff is coming from. You don't need to give me the line numbers, but you need to be able to acknowledge somewhere in your writing and show me that you understand that there is a process. Maybe this is like sort of stanza 3, and that we have a flashback. That's a structural device. Or he's remembering. Again, that is also an acknowledgement of structure. If you can give me those little tidbits, then I can find you some marks. So we've got the opening line. And then I thought, well, actually, does this mean that his ending is inevitable? Is that going to be my key theme? Is that the element of the tragedy? Is his tragedy inevitable? Okay, but it's not arrived yet. Maybe that's the tragedy here. Okay, he's waiting. And I thought, okay, well, he's waiting. Well, is he still waiting? Is it past? Well, it is. It's present tense. And it gives the sense it's continuous. He's still waiting. It still hasn't happened. So this poor young man, a year ago, is on the shoulders of his friends at a football match, is thinking it's an amazing piece of glory that he's got a scar down his leg, and that was a year ago, and he signed up and he thinks Meg's marvellous, but she now doesn't come and see him because she touches him like a queer disease. And then you can see where we've got those contrasts. Okay? So I thought we'd think carefully about that, and then I actually thought, you know what, why don't we do the next one together? So let's have a look at what we've got. So then I've chosen snarled and rattled. I thought, well, actually, I'm going to do a bit of a curveball because that's not necessarily sort of the kind of way to go. But actually, let's kind of think about this notion of inevitability. If you're going to have a buzzsaw and it's described in the terms of being snarled and rattled, that's not going to be a good thing, okay? So what I think we can have here is that it's foreboding, okay? Foreboding means it's going to bring on something bad. So as a brilliant term, okay, then that's what we can use. So you can put in that Frost gives a sense of foreboding, or he brings in the inevitability in a foreboding manner, okay? So nothing good will come of this. Okay, so nothing good will come of this, and that's something that we need to think about. If nothing's good going to come of this, does that also mean it is inevitable? So the tragedy, remember the focus of the question, the tragedy is inevitable. It's going to happen, and there's no way we can stop that. We haven't quite got to that bit yet, so again, Frost builds us up. We haven't got to the actual event, have we? We haven't got to the hand being chopped off. But up here, we already have got this wounded soldier. So maybe he's at the end of his journey, and this little lad over here is at the beginning of his journey, but kind of the beginning of the end. So maybe he's at the end of the end, and he's at the beginning of the end. Again, that's something that you can talk about in terms of the contrast. So let's have a look at this piece of language straight away then. So, snarled and rattled. That one is onomatopoeia. How do you spell it? O-N-O-M-A-T-O-P-O-E-I. Okay, what is onomatopoeia? Well, it's a word that represents the sounds. Okay, so what is the effect? It's all very well to say it is onomatopoeia and then move on, go ta-da, jazz hands. But actually what I want you to do is think about, why is that important? Why does that work? How does that bring out the sense of it being foreboding? Okay, so we have, it's very negative. Dangerous. Think about some of those adjectives. Okay, so you could say that Frost uses dangerous onomatopoeia, insert quote. That would be great. So you've got an adjective that evaluates the nature of the technique, and then you're proving it. Okay, what else does that onomatopoeia show to us? Well, actually, you've got an animal, haven't you? possibly a wild animal, untamed. Now, if you want to be really, really fancy, and by all means, okay, when you make something into an animal or have animal features, it's called zoomorphism. But you don't need to if you really don't want to, okay? Now, why is this inevitable? Well, there's nothing good about it. It's negative, it's dangerous, okay? Foreboding. But the inevitability is built up, okay? Built up, that's structure. Yeah? That's the structural thing. So I'm going to highlight that in yellow. Okay? So this one here, built up, that's structure. Okay? And actually, what you could do, going up to here, this one here, present tense is continuous. He's still waiting. Okay? But it has not arrived yet. And actually, it doesn't arrive at all, because then you can go back to the end line. Can you see how this all begins to blend and move in together? So here, you can go to the end line, and then it says, why don't they come? And what that then allows you to do is that gives you fluidity. It allows you to move the idea forward. Right, I've got a pink one here. I'm raiding my children's colouring pencils, so I don't know what this will work. Is this going to work? Oh, look! Ew, that's not very nice. There we are. So maybe that pink one can then move us into maybe our next point. Or an additional idea. Now, some of the comments that I've given, actually I've given it to most of you, is that from your quote sheet, see if you can have a couple of other points and a couple of other bits of quote that you can actually involve. Excuse me. And then that gives you that chance to build that texture. Right, let's go back down to here. So build up, nice structure questioning. All of this here, all of this stuff, these notes up here, this is all language. But structure, you have those little hints. This is going to work. This is cumulative. There is this process is going to tick off that and structure part in that mark scheme. So how does it build up? Well, what does he do to build up? Give me the technique. Give me the word from that list that we were looking at last week. That word where you do things more than once. Yep, that is repetition. Good, well done. I'm just assuming you're doing this, by the way. Okay. So the build-up comes from the repetition. How many times does he repeat it? Well, he repeats it 3 times. So here, when you get to that point, okay, so don't forget our graph. So rising and falling action. Maybe the point when you've got these bits here, you've got the snarled and the rattled, and that's going to be our climax, isn't it? We don't really get the climax in disabled to the same extent, but there is still that rising and falling action. That's beautiful structure. That's got structure written all over it. I'll try and do a climaxy thing for disabled in a minute, if I remember. So we've got this here. So we've got the climax. Okay, it is now suddenly what is it? It's now suddenly life-threatening. Okay, because then you have the hand. Okay, and the idea, and also we've got sound coming along here as well, and it's really interesting. In the disabled one, it's virtually silent. The sounds come from his memories. They come from things that he can't access. He himself, the soldier, doesn't say anything. Maybe he can't. Maybe through the shell shock. Remember, we can't say PTSD. The shell shock has silenced him. He has no words. He has nothing to say. So then we've got this idea of the hand. I've completely lost my train of thought now. Oh yes, and the sound, okay? So we have this build up. Again, structure. Of the sound. So we have a crescendo. Yeah, crescendo, brilliant word for music. It means gradually get louder. Of, so towards the double repetition of snarled and rattled. Okay, I've written this abbreviated. You will need to make sure that you build that up properly. And actually then what we've got is that, is this inevitable? Yes, it is inevitable, because if you've got this sudden increase in sound and intensity, it leads us into that element of that tragedy, okay? It leads us into that appalling accident. So if we then generally have a look at actually what we've got, this here, and we've got an extra bit there, we've got a little bit here, let's have that grotty pink again. So we've got our main quotes, this one and this one. We've done our language, let's have a look at the language. I don't think I've got another colour actually. What's that? Hang on, hold on. Right, I've got a very corporate purple here for you. Is that going to work? Oh, yes. Okay, so all of this here, language, 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 down here, language, okay? All of this here, all of this is language. We don't need to make sure, we don't need to overdo the structure. And here, you don't need to colour it in like I do. You can if you want. It won't get you any more marks by colouring it in. I'm only doing it so that you can see how much we've got. Now, in years gone by, and I'd completely forgotten about it until a couple of days ago, there was a phrase called know a lot about a little, and this cannot be more important than it is now. So look at all of that information. We've got all of this detail here. We've even got an extra quote. Okay, so that's going to be more language, which you can then do stuff with. Okay, gives you a little bit of structure as well, because we're moving to the end. So there is no end for this poor lad. Okay. And out of those 4 words, we've got all of this information, all of this detail. We've plopped in some really lovely bits of structure. It then moves beautifully into the second poem, that we've got that comparison. Remember, we're going backwards and forwards, and that's really important. That's why we need to make this link. So that's why on that quote sheet I asked you to come up with those connections that you can draw. Here, we've only got 3 words from this poem, but look at all the detail that we've been able to pick up on. We've got lots of purple with the language, got some lovely yellow. Okay, and then down here, we've got a little bit more, because that adds into that development, so a little bit more language. Okay. And that brings on the element of climax and intensity. Whoops. Inevitability, I suppose that's got something to do with structure. Okay, and then here you can just add in. So can you see, in a really, really beautiful, very, very colourful way, how we've actually been able to explode these 2 quotes? That then gives you, crikey, that gives you a 1/5 of your response. Now your essay needs to be around about 800 words, but what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to do a series of these, okay? So if this is to do with inevitability, Oh, I haven't got any more colours now. Oh yes, I've got a red. Okay, if this is to do with inevitability, it's going to be the main point. And again, you don't have to. You are more than welcome to use this as well to get you started. Then what I'll be looking for is probably 3 more of these. And if you can push to a 5th one, that would be amazing. So actually overall, you've got 4 pages of this. Now, over Easter, I would like you to be able to have a go at writing your essay, only in draft form, so it's not going to be perfect, it will be rough around the edges, but the whole purpose behind it is that you write it, I then have a look at it, I mark it, I go back through it for you, give you some feedback, give you some pointers of where I'd like you to develop and things I'd like you to think about, and then you finally give it a quick polish before you hand it back in again. Those dates we'll sort out once we're back after Easter. At the moment it's all a bit unknown, but as far as you and I are concerned, we've still got work to do. So what I'd like you to do for really today and going to probably be Thursday's lesson as well, but possibly ticking off Friday too, because I wouldn't normally see you this week on a Friday because it's week A, but because we're obviously at home, it wouldn't hurt for you to possibly do a bit of English on that period 2 lesson, kind of sneak it away from PE, but I haven't actually said that because it's important you get outside and get some fresh air. Obviously, with your distancing. So, do a few more of these using the quotes that you've already picked up on, okay? And then we can move into putting it all together. And when you put it all together, what we're really doing is just basically filling in the gaps. Now, what you need to make sure that you do is that all of these are simply notes, okay? They don't really mean a huge amount, so you need to make sure that that your writing makes sense, that it fits together, it's got nice flow, you use proper sentences, you use the correct punctuation, and you embed these quotes here. There's no point in picking up a quote without actually putting it into your essay and then using it properly, okay? Any questions once I've posted this, put through iTunes. You may not be able to do it through YouTube, but I will put it onto YouTube as well, so post it through iTunes. But what I would also then do very quickly now, before I finish, is quickly go see if we can do this climax with disabled. So we talked a lot about it with out. Now, if you remember, the actual graph, okay, and what you could do, which will be a really interesting exercise for you to do, is to overlay both of them together. So do your out one, and then put the same on for disabled to see where it works. Okay, so we've got our, I need to do this properly. We've got our graph here, okay. This part here, as we know, is called climax, okay. This bit down here, oops, this bit is the falling action. This bit here is the rising action. If you just heard that was my husband blowing his nose. Bizarrely, the children are very quiet and the dog's not barking, so today's been a good day. Okay, and it's only, gosh, look at the time, only 9:15. So, one thing that we need to be careful of is that we don't make the assumption that every piece of writing and every text and every poem that we come across is going to follow this exactly. Now, I think in disabled, we actually have rise and falls together. Now, I wonder whether we should then kind of work out where that climax is going to be. And I think in disabled, right, I'm going to do this in different colours. So I'm going to highlight them in different colours just because it's easier to see. So in disabled, the climax here, I think is going to be when he realises, that was why, that's it. And I think the quote, and I can't think off the top of my head because I haven't got it in front of me, but I think the quote is that was why. It's the beginning of a line. Let's do disabled in orange this time. Okay. have out in yellow for me. You don't have to follow the same colours, but it's just so that you can see the differences of what we're doing here. Okay, so he says that was why, maybe that was the climax, because that was for him, his sudden realisation, his sudden understanding. All of this is structure. This is beautiful structure-y stuff. Okay? So here, maybe we've got that sudden realisation. That was the mistake that he made, okay? And we'll talk about tragedy down here in a minute. I'm just going to write this to remind me. That was a sudden realisation. It was like, oh God, yep. That was the time. That was when I made my most foolish decision. That was the biggest mistake of my life. Okay? The climax for out. Possibly supper. Maybe it was the sister, Maud, I think her name was. Could be Marjorie. Maybe it was a sister coming in to say supper's time, because that was the point when everything just went horribly wrong. So your climax, another way of thinking about it is, at what point did it go absolutely to pot, when everything went just horribly wrong? So maybe it was when the sister came in and said supper. Maybe. If you've got a different idea, brilliant. Put it in. Okay? And then here, everything changed. How awful. Right, let's stay with out then. So the rising action is going to be that build-up, okay? It's going to be that build-up to this climax point. The falling action is the aftermath, if you will. Okay. So this part down here is kind of next stage. So we know that. We know what that's going to be an out, because they carry on with their affairs. Does the soldier... What's this next thing? Is the structure of the poem tricky? Because actually the end point is at the very beginning of the poem, and the whole thing is going to be that flashback. So maybe that's the waiting. Okay? And then the fact that why, and when he asks why don't they come? Because the two of them, again, tops and tails. It's a cycle. That's really, really important. I'm going to put that over here. I will scan this in and put this on for you, okay? That cycle, that's structure Google juice. It's amazing stuff. You put the word cycle in. Make sure you do it properly. You put it in properly. You show me how and why and where. Amazing. Let's tick, tick, tick. Right, so the rising action here in out. I think it's the young boy doing a man's job. It's inevitable. You think, oh my God, that's really stupid. Of course something's going to happen. He's a kid. Okay, so you've got a young boy. No, it's not that. It's big boy, isn't it? Big boy, man's work. Or something like that. Again, I haven't got the poem in front of me. But again, you think, you know what, that's ridiculous. Obviously something's going to bad happen, because you can't have a young boy, 9, 11, I don't know, doing something of a man. You wouldn't get a first former or a year 5 and put them in front of a circular saw. You would certainly not give a first former the L98 rifle. Nothing good will come of that. That is actually a disaster waiting to happen. And I think this is what out is about, and what Frost is trying to pick up on. It's like, this is a disaster waiting to happen. Okay? And that process behind it. And then he says, this is the disaster. This is what was waiting to happen. And I'm really sorry, guys, but it kind of did. You didn't learn. You didn't pay attention. And they don't down here do that. They don't learn. They don't pay attention. Right, the rising action here from disabled, I think that's fairly obvious, really, isn't it? Because that's going to be the pre-war, the pre-sign-up. So that's going to be God in kilts. That's going to be, please, Meg. Okay, bless the poor lad, he's so foolish. That's going to be cheer the goal. All of that, I mean, you choose which one you want to use, but you can see it just occurring right in front of him. And he didn't see the climate. He didn't see the points. He didn't see those signals. And he was blind to it. He was completely caught up in propaganda. Again, think about the propaganda. Oh, my word. The propaganda during the First World War was an absolute machine. And I think that's something else that you need to be able to acknowledge somewhere along the line, is where Wilfred Owen is getting these ideas, where Frost is getting these ideas, what is that purpose, why are these writers doing that, which comes into the why part. So remember here, and you don't have to do it at every single point, and I don't think you should do it, and I don't want you to do it either. But here, if you have a quote, or if you have a point, or your idea is moving in the direction, why has the writer done? Why were they wanting to do this? Because mark scheme, let's get back to the mark scheme. The mark scheme, when you hit a level 3, which is where I want you guys to be hitting, an explanation is given of how language and structure, we've done that, achieves the effect the poets wanted. This bit is so important. The poets aren't just going to go, you know what, I'm a bit bored today, I'm going to write a poem about death. They're not like that, they're calculated. They've got very, very specific reasons. We know the reasons why Wilfred Owen has done that. We've got his words. We know and we can work out what Frost is doing because, again, we've got that newspaper article and we understand his concerns, which Gabriel was able to pick up on again. Okay? But be careful that this part here is going to be like your salt and pepper. You don't overseason anything because it becomes inedible. We're not doing a history essay. We're not giving me this little potted history about what these writers were doing. You dribble it in, you sprinkle it on, and it enhances the flavour, enhances the texture of your writing, which is incredibly important. Okay, the falling action then. The falling action in Out, I think, is possibly when the doctor got the boy into probably the coma, really, when he had the ether, or the breath, the lacking of the breath. It was less. Hang on, what was it? Oh, I can't remember. Find the quote again. I haven't got it in front of me, but you've got the slowing of the breath. That was an out. That falling action, that's so, and it's slow as well, the slowing. Don't forget you've got the dashes that really, really act as a beat in between the very, very slow, very shallow breaths of the boy. And then we've got the idea of nothing. And again, that adds into that falling action. The falling action doesn't have to be very dramatic. It can be slow, it could be protracted, which means it's kind of stretched out. It can start at the beginning, so we can start this poem at the beginning, at the end of the story. So let's think about disabled then. What is the falling action in disabled? I think, gosh, the falling action could be anything really. It could be in the park. He can't go to the park. It could be waiting for death. It could be the infirmaries. There we are, the infirmaries. I'm just going to write infirmaries. So having to spend weeks in infirmaries doing as the rules tell him. There's nothing there. And here it's that pathetic dribbling away, that pathetic fading away of a life that was so vibrant and energetic and beautiful and young and had such promise, as just fading away into nothing because he's waiting and no one comes to see him. Falling action, again, you can bring in queer disease, I suppose. So there's lots and lots and lots. And actually, again, with that structure, oops. Again, with that structure, is that what we've got? Can we do other things here? Maybe the climax is not just there. Maybe it's the pouring in shell holes. Don't forget, you can touch on the imagery, the brutality behind what it's doing, all of the notes that are on iTunes there for you. Now, one thing else that I want to quickly pick up on before we finish this morning, and if you can then talk about this in your essays, actually this would be really interesting. Now, one thing that you need to do is you need to be able to understand actually what tragedy is. Now, if something is tragic, it is incredibly heartbreaking, it's really sad, It's devastating, it's utterly appalling, things shouldn't have happened. A tragedy is down to mistakes and choices. Okay? So there are several stages. So the first one is going to be a personality flaw. And one thing I'm going to challenge you is how can you see these flaws in the poems? Okay? How can you see these aspects kind of be hinted at throughout the writing? So the personality flaw. Now this is usually pride. Okay, or something called self-conceit. If it's self-conceited, basically you're a little bit self-centered, to be perfectly honest. Okay, you think you are untouchable. Do you see any of those in our poem? Is the young soldier a little bit self-important? Does he think he's going to be immortal? Is his flaw the sense that he can do whatever he wants and nothing's going to happen? And I've written on some of your pieces the idea of the never never. The never never is like Peter Pan. It's where, oh, it'll never happen to me. Oh, that'll never occur. Oh, tomorrow is never going to be here. Okay, so this idea of the never never, it only ever happens to someone else. And actually, in terms of kind of the context of what we're dealing with at the moment, it'll never happen to me. Well, actually, kind of, unfortunately, it might do. And if you are, I do hope that you will get better soon. But with the soldiers, they never had that sense that there was ever an ending. By being promoted, by having, smiling, they wrote my lie, was a sense that they were glorious, okay? That they had this power, and they were gods. They really were. Now, as a result of this personality flaw, a direct consequence, okay, is going to be a bad mistake, so a bad choice. So that bad choice in disabled, fairly obvious, signed up. So smiling, they wrote my lie. Okay. The bad choice in out. I think maybe they didn't give the boy the afternoon off. I think it's something like a half hour. Ending early. Again, find the evidence. As a result of that, which comes to here, okay, you then have what we call the consequences. Now, I can give you the Latin terms if you want me to, but I'm not going to because it's not really necessary. But then you've got the consequences, the outcome. Actually, I will give you the Latin terms because I think they're really cool. Okay, so you've got the consequences and you've got the outcome. So here, so the consequences for out, hand, and hand getting chopped off. The consequences for disabled, what would that be? Well, goodness me, that's going to be anything. No one cheers him home. Okay, so you've got that solitary man. Remember that yes, there is a Christian reading. Okay, so no cheers. So there is the idea that is a priest because he looks after the soul, but only bring that up if it is relevant to your answer. If it is not relevant to your answer, park it. Okay? As a result of this then, these consequences, there needs to be a learning point. And that's what Wilfred Owen's wanting to do. Remember in his quotes, he said it's for the generation to come. He's warning them about what's going on. Don't make the same mistakes that we did, because if you do, nothing will happen. Priestley, oh my word, it's Inspector Calls. In its entirety, the learning point was blood, fire and anguish. Okay, so here, and I'm going to put a tick, yes they have learnt, or an X, no they haven't learnt. And then, if they haven't learnt, what happens? They start the process all over again. It becomes that cycle, doesn't it? There we are, so a bit of a... Okay, so back to their affairs. Does the soldier learn? Does the soldier have any way to finish it? Possibly not. Maybe this is when you need to come out of the poem. This is when we need to go to Wilfred Owen, okay? For the generations to come. Okay, so this part here, fancy term, is called anagoresis. Okay, this one here is called catharsis. This is hamartia.